Hello, welcome to HOTPOT. I'm your host, Joni Poon, stirring the pot on Asian BIPOC mental health and wellness. Great. So, Orane, thank you for being here. I'm so excited about this, and not that I'm doing this in any particular order, and I want to share that you're my very first guest. I'm so honored and excited and nervous at the same time. And I'm so excited about what we have to talk and share. And as a beginning intention, any listeners out there, I want to invite you to just sit along and be invited to participate as if you're joining in like a couple friends talking and you're part of this circle of friends and where you get to listen to stories. And the intention for me is to hopefully inspire you through these stories to allow you to start exploring who you are as well and what really calls for your soul's attention. Is there any intentions you would like to share before we dive in, start talking? And thank you for bringing those spice nuts.
Oh,
lovely.
You're very welcome. First off, congratulations on the start of your podcast.
Yeah.
I'm very honored to be your first guest and try all the experiments you want to try. An intention that I've been feeling a lot lately, and I think feels right for this, is I think through this storytelling is around about finding my voice and finding how I want to show up in this space. I think I've worked so much of my career elevating the voices of others that it also feels nervous for me to be able to share my story and have it be recorded and shared out publicly. And I know that has to do around control, controlling a certain image, saving face, saving face, and the fears that, what if I say something, it might come back. But I know that I can't control what other people may think about me, and so I think a lot of my intention is to show up, share the stories that I think need to be heard, because I've always found the most inspiration when I see others who look like me, who share stories that give me permission to be able to share mine. And so I hope that through my shares, it may inspire others to do the same.
Yeah, well, thank you. And thank you for showing up and doing something so brave. Yeah, it's not easy. I get it. Like that piece where you talked about saving face. Like me, I'm mostly Chinese, and the saving face is so important. Like, we rather suffer in silence and not even ask for help or even do things that might be helpful for us because how we might be perceived outwardly, right? And does that look good enough, or do we look successful enough, or does showing vulnerability mean we're weak? And therefore we have brought in shame and dishonor our family because we're not strong and tough. Right? Yeah, it's so interesting piece. So thank you for bringing that up.
It's been a big part of my life. So I think it's about time that it's shared and aired out, because it's been building up for too long.
Oh, tell me more about that, or whatever is inspiring you to come in and do like a fireside.
Fireside.
Thank you. Fireside chat with us, or me, our listeners.
Oh, where to begin? I guess I could say that, at least growing up, I know I've mentioned this to you, but a bit of context around, my family immigrated here in the late 80s from Hong Kong. As my family is my dad, my mom, my brother, and my sister. And then they had me. And so I was the first to be born in Canada in my family. And so for the most part, like I think I had a really nice, happy childhood, family. My dad had his own business, my mom helped out, and we all saved up and went on holidays, and it was all amazing until my mom got breast cancer. And at the age of 7, when I was the age of 7, she passed away. And so I think the context of us being an immigrant family, being away from families, not having supports, only being still fairly new to the country, you don't have all the family support as we would as if we still lived in Hong Kong. And so it was, I imagine, because I was 7, so this is me, my adult thinking back, a very isolating experience for my dad, losing his partner, losing his wife, his business partner, the mother to his kids. It's very isolating, and my dad is quite a traditional man, and so saving face is of course a really big thing, and I also don't think that we as a family had the language to talk about traumas, to talk about death, to talk about even the conversation of going to therapy was never a conversation.
Yeah, it's so interesting how you brought that up. Like even, I recently, so for those of you that don't know what I do like different therapy modalities. So I'm a therapist myself. I practice in talk therapy, hypnotherapy, music therapy. I also do intuitive energy work, not limited somatic work, and it's so interesting. Like I myself, I find that saving face piece is like a part of what I struggled. Is like, oh, I can't look weak, or I can't look like I need help, or I need support. Just because, like for me, growing up, that saving face bit is like, oh, I don't know about you, but I got compared a lot. It's like, oh, your cousin this, back in where they're staying, or your one of my friend's daughters does this, and they excel in all this. So my parents were really supportive. They got us extra tutoring and stuff, but I remember like showing about our weak sides or asking for help was not very well received. My parents were more than willing to help, but then, I don't know, and I didn't realize that this was traumatic for me until much later on. I remember getting help with some math stuff, and I couldn't get it. My dad's really smart, and he did it all by himself. So talk about saving face, like my grandma didn't help him. He was mainly raised from my great-great-grandmother. My grandmother worked quite a bit, and so mother was never around, and so he was a very good, obedient son, always did everything on his own, and in ways went out of his way to make sure that he honored the elders. He would save up money so that his mom didn't have to work extra hard, so he could put himself through school or got scholarships or whatever, and he would study in the washroom. So that, because like space in Hong Kong was so limited, like if when someone's trying to sleep, if you shine the light, you're pretty much in like a one-room studio, right? There's no like divisions, bedroom or anything like that, and so he would study in the washroom. And my dad worked really hard. He was really smart. And so when it came to helping me, and if I couldn't get it, I could see the frustrations of like, I never got help. Not that he was, but he's like, why are you so stupid? I would say, I'm laughing, but it's not funny if you really think about it. And I'm like, wow, you don't really think of saying that to a child.
Yeah.
And I love my dad, and we have a very loving relationship. And I don't think he did that out to hurt, with intention. And yet it shows his toughness and how he didn't get support, and how he thought love was received was like, okay, I have to be strong and save face and be the obedient good child, because like your neighbors were always like, oh, your son's so good because da 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 da. Of course, if you do something bad, then it erases everything else, right? And so like he would say, oh, you're so stupid, and I think he got so frustrated. At one point, he like smacked me, And then like hard, and I was like crying. I was like, don't cry. And then you're taught not to trust your body because you're feeling pain, because you have to suppress it, so that you're like, no, I have to be strong, because if I'm crying, we get smacked again, right? And so, and I'm not saying, at that time I didn't realize, through that cultural context and lens of like trying to save face, be strong, and be smart. Asians work hard, that it has left, some unwanted outcomes, right? Later on in my life, which I didn't realize, right? And it's not that, in some ways that is a form of unhealthy coping skills that has been passed down, because I'm sure I knew, they talked about it, my dad shared how he was beat up as a child too if he didn't behave, right? And so, in Western culture we call that abuse, and in some ways it is, but that's what they grew up with, that's what they knew, and that's how they thought tough love is, and that's how they love, right? And so that showed up, and then I'm like, oh no, wonder why I have difficulties with authority, And that's what therapy, doing work and healing and self-growth has taught me. It's like, oh, that's why I have some attachment things I need to work on, or, why I find it really hard. Why do I always have to look like superior, or I had that chip on my shoulder before, because I don't want to look weak. But something that also becomes inauthentic, because you're trying to put on a face, right? And other people can feel it. So there's that bit.
Thank you for sharing all of that.
Oh yeah.
There were so many threads to pick up on, and what I feel right now is a lot of the similarities that we had growing up, and I can imagine also with my parents, similar kind of upbringing in Hong Kong, where violence could be very normalized. Like we call it abuse here, but there it's I don't think I think it's normalized.
It's normalized.
It's normalized, and this idea of needing to do it yourself, very self-made, also very common threads in my family growing up, and it's, of course, like me, I don't think it teaches, like asking for help could be seen as a sign of weakness, but really I think, it could be a sign of strength to be able to say, like, I don't know, I need support and I need help, and I think that's actually inviting people into your life that I think can only enrich it, and expand your networks. But wow. I was just like sitting with that actually. Just kind of like.
Well, as you were sharing that came up for me. I was like, oh, yeah, it's really interesting how everyone has their own different experiences, shaped by culture, shaped by, our parents' own upbringing, the family systems, right? If you look at it, but if you look deeper, it's like the cultural context and how each generation teaches the next, right? And what are we teaching? What are we carrying? What are we, holding on to as well, right? I didn't know I was holding on to some of those stuff until I started working on myself, right? And recognizing, I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah, maybe I behave in these ways because of this. I didn't realize that. And it's not so much of like blaming my parents. If anything, having an understanding is like, oh, wow, they went through that. And that leads me to think, like, your dad, like, wow, like, it must have been so hard, because, like, he doesn't have that community, like you mentioned, right? And, loss of his partner, even more, so it's like a culture that, with saving face, and can be very isolating already, let alone what your family went through in addition to that. Oh, so hard, because I can imagine, like, even when I was like talking to someone else, like a Chinese elder, and they know what I did, and I know they were going through some hard times, and I was like just making suggestions, like, oh, there's different options, and support, asking is not weakness, right? Phrasing in a way that hopefully allow them gently. It's like sometimes seeking support gives you like more knowledge about yourself and awareness so that you can empower yourself to even be stronger.
Yeah.
Right?
And I think about, for my dad, I don't know how much of it is saving face and, you know, not wanting to look weak and therefore not asking for help, or just not knowing how to ask for help.
Yeah.
I think so much, at least, you know, I think that was a lot of my mom's role. My mom was really much that social connector in our family, and, you know, set up the play dates for me, you know, created the communities that made our vacations happen, you know, made sure that the siblings all got along, you know, very more of a feminine side of things. Yeah, and so I think, you know, when I think about the way my dad was raised, it's just the outcome of not ever asking for help and knowing how to, and that of course has also translated to how I am, you know, and this like I must take on everything on my own and not ask, but that's something in progress of changing.
Yeah.
But I also have found through my own journeys of healing that I have a lot more empathy for my dad, because I think growing up I had a lot of anger for him and a lot of resentment of, you know, how could you, you know, why were you this kind of father? You know, you had three kids, you know, and like just a lot of not understanding that he of course is his own human too, and of course, you know, in a time I blamed him because I felt in a time of I need my father because I miss my mother, he's not available. And of course, you know, when I think back now, it would be such a superhuman trait to be available, knowing that you've just suffered all this loss and still had to take care of 3 children, while also having your own business, while also being a new immigrant to this country, while also not really being able to speak the English language really well, not having support systems. Like, I have so much more empathy for how he did, and I truly believe he did his best.
Yeah.
I truly believe that he was doing his best to support us as the man of the family he thought he needed, how he knew how to provide for us, and also do his best to try to be there. But emotionally, I think it's just not how he was raised. So I don't think that that's a language that he knows how to show, a language he knows how to speak. And I can't blame him for that. I can't blame him for being someone that he isn't. He did his best in providing us a roof over our heads and feeding us, and that was what was in his capability, given all the grief that I'm sure he went through. And I don't want to speak for him. I know he's not here. This is just all what I think. And as my dad and I get closer, we're exploring these conversations more. But it takes a lot of time for my dad also to be even open to having these conversations without dismissing them, because it talks about feelings and grief and yeah.
Well, you're right. Like, it's not in a vocabulary. Like, it's very factual. Like when I talk to
Functional,
especially with. I mean, there's usually in family dynamics, like there's one, the mother usually, the nurturer, tends to be more the social connector. Then there's the silent,
stoic
Asian father, quiet, right? And then talking about emotions is not very done culturally. And none have I witnessed, like, so usually, like, even when I talk to my grandparents, it's like very functional. It's like,
what you eat,
how's
are
your
you
health?
cold, how's school, how's work.
Have you thought about this? What are your life plans? Why?
Yeah.
So it's not like, oh, how are you feeling? Or what's going on for you? Like, why are you feeling like this? And no feelings talk for sure. And it's really interesting you brought that up, because I remember I was talking to someone else, and then as I was sharing about, you know, I also went through this earlier on in my phases, like becoming a therapist. as like you have to, and that's part of my modality. I strongly believe in living and experiencing different modalities and practices myself and going through them myself, training in them as well, before I even support others through it. And then through that own healing and discovery, like initially I did it out of interest for the modalities and fascination for ultra conscious states and what our subconscious holds. But there was that judgment piece. It's like, well, my parents raised me well. I mean, I have 2 legs, 2 feet. I mean, direct translation, I can talk, I'm able. I'm not broken, right? And so why do I need all this, right? And it was interesting because I was like, oh my gosh, as I started unpacking these layers, I was like, oh, not that I'm broken, but there are certain patterns that are for sure not healthy. That has actually taught me to be a person who I'm not really. Like, taught me to be a person that's like who my parents see Joni as, or what culturally people see Joni as, like, oh, I'm Chinese, or, and I'm like, but that's not just who I am, right? I am my own human being with my own different life experiences mixed in with how the different interactions I have. And through that comes different, different emotions and different things that can be not always positive. And doesn't mean I'm broken, but it has its own outcomes, right? If I tie to those narrations and stories. And what I'm trying to get to is that I remember when I was sharing that, I was like, oh, I get what that feels like. Because I remember talking to another lady. And it was funny because I worked with their son. And the son started doing work and started realizing, started opening up, and it's like I didn't realize my emotional range and vulnerability and capability to express myself was very limited. The only thing I knew was anger, like what you mentioned, because that you can see that easily expressed, especially in men. And then he said a phrase initially when we were talking, and I was sharing my stories and how I was doing my own growth and healing. And I was like, oh, that's something interested in you. He's like, oh no, there's nothing wrong with me, I'm not broken. And I was like, I get that. I was early on like that too, and I understand why you're saying this. Now tied back to many, many years in the future, like 30 years, I know his mom quite well as well, and I know his mom was going through some things, and I'm like, maybe better through your mouth and mind, because, comes better received through, like, by a son. And I was like, maybe something, you saw how he actually finally sought out counseling and other therapy work like craniosacral, and realized, his range of feeling things was very limited. He wasn't receiving, he wasn't also giving. It was always a very limited context of it. And he lost a friend earlier on, and he never properly grieved to process that either. And he didn't realize how that affected him much later on. It affected his relationships as well. And interestingly, so through the different modalities and therapy, he came to realize, it's not that I was broken, but I was limited by those constructs, those stories that have been taught or whatever, been modeled. And then so he was like, yeah, maybe this will help me, maybe having support from my mom would be nice. And then guess the first phrase when he suggested to his mom said, what his mom said, oh, there's nothing wrong with me, I'm not broken. And then we smiled at each other, like, oh, I guess that's where you learned that from your mother. And yeah, I'm sharing the story because I've shared the story before with other friends, and he has allowed me to do it. So, but that's an example, and that's how I can relate that early, like limited, not knowing, right? And then how do we process that, like hard feelings, like grief, like if we're so constrained to what we're shown how to, if we don't express,
On that thread of expression, at least in my story, I can say that I don't actually know the words to express it. And so I was born in Canada, as I mentioned, and I learned Cantonese through my parents. I went to Chinese school, but isn't a language that I speak primarily. Primarily, it's English. And so over the years, you know, not also, like, I imagine if I grew up in Hong Kong, of course, all my cousins, my family members, aunts and uncles, I'd be speaking it all the time. But here, I don't get the practice, and so my Cantonese vocabulary has really deteriorated to the point now where even if I want to talk to my dad, who's primarily Cantonese, I don't have the words. So I can talk to you right now about how I'm feeling. I can talk to you about grief. I can talk to you about my experience using different psychedelic substances. I don't even have those words in Cantonese. I have to piece together, you know,
so there's that language
roundabout words without actually just being able to get to the core of it. I don't even know the word grief in Cantonese. I just learned psychedelic in Cantonese, but even then it doesn't really feel like it encompasses what I want it to say. So that's a very real boundary, barrier.
No, boundary
and
same
barrier.
thing.
Yeah.
So
for me to even express, and I know that, you know, I know that this is something that, yeah, it's going to be it's an ongoing challenge.
And I'm curious, how did you discover, you know, this, your own authentic voice in wanting to start expressing yourself more and realizing that, oh, I only had anger? And how did you start expanding on that, and also wanting to build this beautiful relationship with your father and wanting to connect with him more? I mean, besides the language barrier, we can explore that more, but I'm curious how you even want to get to that space of wanting to connect with your father more, and how you processed your grief or your emotions. I mean, losing a mother at 7, that must be hard too.
Yeah, I like the question, and I want to just say that the grief is not finished processing. It's always going to be in progress, I think. Not to say that maybe one day I will finish processing it, but it's still being processed. And same with finding my authentic voice. It's still also in the beginning stages of what that looks like and feels like. For me, this is my first time being on a podcast, and so even sharing my story feels scary and new, but I know I need to start somewhere.
Yeah.
Sorry, what was the question?
Well, I mean, it's beautiful how you're even showing up. Like you said, it's a process. And thank you for reminding me and us that it is a process. It's that piece of finding our authentic selves, our voice, and having that strength to speak up and share. That takes courage, and that is part of discovering our authentic selves. And that's always a path and journey as we unpack more different layers, right? And that bit about, you know, grieving, you're right, it doesn't finish. I mean, from what I know, even as a therapist, it comes in waves.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's stronger and it doesn't make sense. Like, even though it happened many, many years ago, it can come back flooding really strongly, and there's no right or wrong with it. And so thank you for reminding us that. And I think it's important because sometimes people think it's like, okay,
It's done.
yeah, it's not.
Yeah.
It's not. And I think in some ways it's a beautiful thing, because if you think about it, it's never done, because energetically you still have that person, that their memories or whatever, that connection. There's still that love. Just because they're physically not here doesn't mean that's the end of it. And so because there's still that connection in a different form, that love, the memories, or whatever it is, for how you experience that person and what they meant to you. The way it has changed, of course, is no longer physical, but it doesn't mean that all the other connections are gone. For me, I believe that, and so, you know, it makes sense to sometimes have different emotions, to feel missing, to feel like grief, and sometimes of that grief can be fondness too. Yeah.
I read a quote recently that I really liked, which was, grief is love that has nowhere to go. And so I think, in that vein of my mother is no longer physically here, and I grieve that, and I'm learning other ways to connect with her. She left my physical life at the age of 7. So I have very few memories of her. And so a lot of my memories are actually very, very faint. But most of how I remember my mom is through photos. And we obviously stopped taking photos of her at a certain point. And so even the very physical image that I have of her is from back when I was 7 years old, and even hearing her voice is something that is not something I remember much. So sure.
Yeah, thank you. Like how has this journey been for you, and how have you allowed yourself to actually feel more into that, or learning to discover more that connection piece with her, even though she's not physically here? Because I heard you mentioning earlier on that you're like, oh, all I knew was anger, or that's what was expressed, and I had a lot of anger. How did you move through that and expand it on not just anger? Like what led you or helped you, or?
How much time do we have?
Good question. We have another 15 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. It's these are all very big questions, which is why I'm trying to think like what I can share in the time restraint.
I mean, it is our very first one.
Yeah.
So we can be a little longer, and as I do more of this, I'll fine tune it.
Oh, no worries.
Good time. So.
Yeah, I'm also learning. But maybe I think it would be helpful, maybe like if I kind of shared a bit about my story.
Yeah, I'd
like
love to hear that.
how I got here, and so I've mentioned before that a big moment in my life was my mom passing away at 7, and I, growing up as in that immigrant family context, we didn't really have a lot of space to grieve. It was not very, when I was crying in my room, it was this like, stop crying, she's gone, stop crying. There was not a lot of support for me as a child to be able to express, and so of course it gets suppressed into the body. And I remember growing up, I couldn't even talk or think about my mom without my eyes starting to water. Whenever people at school, it's just like, oh, what does your mom and dad do? Or like, oh, like, nice to meet your dad, where's your mom? It was really hard for me to talk about it. And it wasn't until my early 20s that I really decide to look at this. And I don't know if I would have called it grief back then, but a really good friend of mine, my best friend, she's someone I look a lot up to, and she tends to be the adventurous one in our duo, and she brought up that she was going to do an ayahuasca retreat. And so me not having even maybe smoked one joint at that point in my life, I was like, oh, well, she's going to do it, I want to do it too.
What led you to even want to explore that? Because I know, oftentimes, I mean, culturally from what I experienced, like, oh, drugs bad, no.
Yeah.
Any drugs are bad,
Yeah.
right? Unless prescribed by a doctor.
Yeah.
And so, like, what led you to be even open to that?
Yeah. I think I've always had a bit of a rebellious nature in me.
Love that, yeah.
Yeah, but like, I mean, I think it's low-key rebellion when I like compare it, but also like in the context of a Chinese culture, I definitely think I was different in that sense. You know, like from the young age, like I've always felt very different having lost a mother. I've always felt like I was not quite Chinese enough, but also not quite white enough. You know, there was a rejection of my culture, but also I didn't quite fit in, and so I had a hard time finding my place in school. But as I got older and I started to get a little bit more comfortable with the fact that I you know, was Chinese Canadian, I think at that point, you know, what led me to ayahuasca was just like, I don't know, like I trust my best friend a lot, and she was really drawn, you know, when she was something always she's wanted to do, and I think I watched 2 TED Talk videos, and I'm the type of person that like is like, okay, let's do it, and I will just jump in with 2 feet first.
Wow.
And before I can like logically think my way out of it, like, I'm just like, okay, just do it.
Sometimes you just
Do it.
Right?
And you know, this is before all the things that I know now around harm reduction and like find, you know, all the things I know now. But I think back then I was just like, okay, sure, this sounds good. Like I have no idea. I don't even know if I knew the word psychedelic when I did it, and so some could call it reckless. And I just did it. Yeah. And I'm glad I did, because it allowed me for the first time, really, since my mom died. I was 23 when I did ayahuasca. All those years, it was the first time that I actually could process and to be able to look at it, and to go through her death, to remember who she, remember her, and to remember that she loves me. And that was the message that I got. I got to remember, and I got to feel her love, something that I had forgotten, you know, or it was so deep down and buried that I didn't even remember or know that it was there. So,
you just connected from.
Yeah, so it was really beautiful to connect to that motherly love again. Yeah. And so that was probably one of the first times I could think about my mom and not be in this sad sorrow place, but really from a place of like, wow, okay, there is more, and you know, this is what she wanted for us, this is what she wanted for me, this is how she wanted for our family, and all the love that she has for us that yeah, I didn't really get.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing. That's so beautiful, because you're right, sometimes when we experience something so big like loss, it's so easy to only remember one side of that. And then over time we lose sight of the whole person itself, but we only relate to it that way, right? And that's another thing I find beautiful about plant medicine, because like we do know, like cognitively we're like, no, that person loved us, you know. But when cognitively we're like, we know, you know, we are loved, or we're their children, or what certain things are, we're aware. And then what plant medicine or psychedelics offer is that it gives you a key to a door that you've always had access to, maybe you've forgotten how to even go through that door.
Exactly.
And the beautiful part is that it's not only showing you cognitively, it actually allows you to feel it and connect with those feelings and emotions and those stories in a very embodied sense. It's not just, oh yeah, I know what it is, I know I'm loved, but it's actually
feeling that love.
And then you're just like, oh my gosh, yes, it allows us to remember that there's more. Oh, so yeah, thank you.
That was really special, and it started me off in this journey of being curious about altered states in the psychedelics world, and for so many years it's always stayed in this private, personal side of me, this bubble, because once again we talk about saving face, and of course the talk about the legalities of psychedelics, and not wanting it to, like fearing that it would impact my professional life, I always kept it hidden, secret, buried. Only close friends of mine could know that I had different journeys. And so it took me many years until, recently that I finally am finding a place where I can merge these two sides of me, and that I can talk about my stories, and that, these journeys that these like new learnings that I have about my mother, they weren't a dream. Like they actually, like I can talk about that they were a psychedelic experience. And I think that's part of me finding my voice, and that I don't need to hide so much anymore. I can openly talk about it. I can starting to share more with my family, that this is what I do, that these are my interests, and finally also now finding a profession that is legal in the clinical space, where I can develop programs for psychedelic assisted therapy with whole medical teams. I think it's a dream for me to finally be here and work with people that I can openly talk about psychedelics with, and talk about harm reduction, and talk about finding good people to support you, and how that integration piece could look like post journeys, because I had to figure all that out on my own, and just piece it together. So that lived experience, I think, shapes a lot of how I do my work and how I show up today, and
why you do the work.
And why I do the work, because I feel I've benefited so much, and I've been able to heal many parts, or continue to learn to heal, I would say, and see parts of me that maybe I didn't want to see. But it's also created this endless curiosity that I have to learn more about myself, because if ayahuasca could really bring out all these things that were there but I just didn't have access to, what else is there? Like, I want to learn more about what makes me me, and part of that also is cultural. Like, I want to learn more about my Chinese side, because I'm going on a different tangent here, but
it's you. What I'm hearing is you're embracing more of who you are. You're not having to hide parts of yourself, and that could be parts of like you know, that there's that curious, rebellious side that I'll jump in and want to experience stuff, but this is what, through those experiences, have really helped me feel love, feel connection even through loss, and find beauty through that suffering too, and also be able to express yourself not just only from sadness, right, and anger, and also you in your finding your authentic voice, now you're sharing your story, also finding your passions and your job that allows you to be more you, so you don't have to hide, like you said. So that's beautiful, and not off tangent. Like what you express is so wonderful, and you even, I think you even mentioned talking about like sharing about that with your family and your
learning to.
And that's the hard thing, and that's something I'm inspired by, because given what I do, I love what I do. I have yet to tell my parents fully. What I do, like especially working with psychedelic integration. I talk about my talk therapy, I talk about my music therapy, altered conscious states, not so much. Sometimes I bring it up, but they don't ask too many questions about it, and so I haven't learned how to navigate that yet. And so,
my family will be hearing it for the first time. I mean, I hope to tell them before this podcast comes out that this is, I'm sure, and I'm still many friends, and of course extended family that don't know, so I'm still very much learning to navigate this space, but that's what I love about being able to talk to you, Joni, about it, because we have that shared cultural context, and we can learn from like, hey, how did you come out to your parents, or how did I
haven't yet.
Exactly, like
it's
coming
scary.
out of the psychedelic closet.
It's scary. I haven't yet, because there's certain things that I haven't shared with them. The only parts that I have shared, they know I do therapy work. They know I do certain things, but like plant medicine, supporting people through psychedelic integration, or hypnotherapy, all that stuff. I might mention it, but I haven't dived into it. No, they haven't. They ask further questions, and if I find it scary. I'm still learning and figuring it out, and I'm sure the right moment will come.
It will
Not
come.
sure yet when,
Yeah.
But yeah, thanks like for bringing that up, because I think that's so important. Like as you're exploring and dropping more into your authentic self and voice, now showing up in your career. Because what did you do before you?
So now I develop psychedelic assisted therapy programs at a healthcare clinic. And before I was freelancing. I had many years working in communications, working in tech, all the industries, sports, food, but from the communication and events point of view. And so
did that bring you joy?
it did, and like there was lots of, it was a place of following curiosities.
Okay.
Of like, I didn't quite know what I wanted to do, and opportunities would come up, and I would say yes, and I would try things, learn new skills, but eventually, there was a deeper meaning of why I was doing this work that was always missing. And I think over the years, have I really realized that I don't care about, like there's just certain things I just don't connect to, and I don't care about selling you a product that I myself don't believe in. And so, but working in the healing space, working in healthcare, being able to talk to people about their mental health conditions and know that we may have a solution or a treatment for them that can also better their mental health so that they can better connect with themselves and better connect with their community, I find so much meaning and satisfaction in this work.
Why is that? Like, why do you find that pull to that work? Why do you feel that there's that need? Why is it meaningful for you?
I think the meaning is, oh man, I had this. Yeah, the meaning of my work, I said, I get to be in service. I think one of the messages that I got in the work that I do, and so much of events and communications, like I've always been in this serving role, and that it brings me the most joy when I get to cook for others, when I get to help my friends, or invite them and host. And so I very much love to share my love through acts of service. And so being in this space where I get to share something that I'm really passionate about, like psychedelic assisted therapy and psychedelic healing, with people, and to be able to help them on their journey, it means, I feel like I'm not saying this the best I could, but
I think it makes great sense.
To help and serve, and
I think you allowing yourself to show up more as you, because like you mentioned earlier, you probably early in your career you were like, oh, I experienced this and have come to these beautiful parts of me understanding my grief and that love connection through a dream, right? You mentioned that, but then really was through psychedelics, through ayahuasca, and I think maybe given your profound experiences and how it has really widened your emotions from just anger to like, oh, it's not just suffering, but there's love there too, even through this loss, and how you're building this connection with your mom in a different way, and not having to hide in the closet. Like, there's parts of you that really gravitated towards those experiences and they're meaningful for you. You're able to show up more as yourself and now integrate those parts into your work. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, those definitely add to the personal satisfaction of things. Being able to show up as myself it's not something that I feel like I have been able to do in my work. So of course that's amazing, and being able to work in a space where I feel other people are also working on healing themselves. So it's a very different work environment when you get to talk to people in that way. And also, I think it's a very hopeful work. I think maybe up until now the status quo is very much, you are unhappy, you may be depressed, you may have to go on antidepressants, take different forms of medication. And I think or not, and find other coping mechanisms. And I think, not to say that everybody needs to try psychedelics in order to achieve a higher state of themselves, but I think it should be an option for people, and giving people that option, giving people with the knowledge that it's not just some street party drug that gets you happy and high, and the next thing you know you're going to be doing heroin. It can be a healing medicine and treated like a medicine, and so that's where I find a lot of energy to do this work, and I think also, it's still something I'm practicing, but when I think about psychedelics, like, I do want to think of it as medicine, and the way that I was taught when I was going into ayahuasca is the idea that you use it and you eventually use less and less and less of it. It's called medicine for a reason. I don't want psychedelics to become another source of dependence for people, but the idea that, like, you may have an ayahuasca journey, maybe you need to have one every few years, but exactly, it's this, like, eventually you use less and less so that you can be who you are without needing to rely on a substance.
That's true. Well,
same with psilocybin or anything.
Yeah,
like
well,
that.
same with anything, like you mentioned, like, even a lot of times people don't know this, but when you're on antidepressants, they're actually originally, how it's supposed to be used is that it helps you, doctors prescribe it to help you get back into a more stable regulation point of state. And then from there you're supposed to titrate off and do all these other things to, once you're in that state, is much easier to manage and to build resources and tools to how to stay there and titrate off your medicine, not be on it forever. And unfortunately, that's Western medicine is not the case, right? And I understand there's some people that needs to be on it, but then it can look different and depending on what you do, right? So, but original is supposed to be like that. It's supposed to help bring you back to a state of regulation.
Makes sense.
And then you do things to maintain that without the drugs. It's not supposed to be a lifelong thing, And so thank you for bringing that up. And as I know that we can continue to talk on more, and I love hearing your stories, and I feel like we can continue to share different stories and similarities and how they're different. I'd love to have you back on another time, because I know you have more knowledge and stories to share. Right now, as we're wrapping up, what are two questions for you? What's something you would tell yourself with the knowledge that you have now? If you're like growing up back then, what's something that you would like, this is insight that I wish I knew back then, I would love to share with a younger version of yourself?
I would tell myself, be patient. Give yourself the grace of not knowing, and you may be stumbling upon and just grasping and trying to find meaning in things, for things that you don't understand why they happened. You'll think a lot about it, and try not to get captured by the emotions behind those thoughts, because they're just thoughts, and in time you'll see it, how they'll unfold and where I'll take you.
Thank you.
Kind of cryptic.
Yeah, I like it. And then the second question is, what is something you're curious to explore or would like to try for the future?
Something I'd like to explore. I would like to explore more breath work, actually. It's for one, not a substance that requires you to take, but it's something that's so natural and part of all of us as human beings is our breath. And I think that it can do many powerful things in bringing us to different altered states just by breathing, which is, anybody can have access to that. It doesn't require
it doesn't.
It doesn't require, you
have it.
hearing something, you have it, and having someone perhaps guide you through it, or I would love to try breathwork and see where that can take me and unlocking new parts of myself. And I think that goes with the ever curiosity that I have of, what is at my disposal that I already have, instead of seeking this outward medicine, no, I have it in me already, and it's just waiting.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing your voice and being you. Yeah. Thank you for listening.
I look forward.
Okay, we'll see how that goes. How did that feel for you?
Felt good. Overall, I felt
I don't know. I feel like we went everywhere, but
I mean, we're trying something for the first time. I'm also just like, oh my god, what am I saying? Like, am I just blah, 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 blah.
This has been a HOTPOT Pod Productions, brought to you by Lucinor, a premier online psychedelic dispensary. Wander your mind at lucinor.net.